So it seems like Mike Mentzer, Arthur Jones, Dorian Yates, their hit style of training is becoming all the rage, and everybody's jumping on board. And it just seems like everything he said makes total perfect sense. And you've even got a huge cult following saying Mike Mentzer is God. Every word he says is correct, and if you think otherwise, you're a moron. Well, as we're going to find out in this video, that may or may not be true. What I intend to do is actually break down via modern science what Mike Mentzer got right and maybe what he didn't get so right, so we can apply it in a way that's going to be more effective for us today, because the point of science is to have improved based on what people were doing 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, and take it from there. However, what I will say is a lot of people are still stuck on the whole high volume approach, which you could say was influenced by Arnold. Now, we're also going to be able to analyze if there's validity to that approach or if the truth ends up lying somewhere down the middle. And on top of that, I'm going to give you the most practical and effective way to implement all of this for yourself based on your preference, your lifestyle, your goals, and everything in the most effective way based on and backed by modern science. So let's go ahead and jump in. First, I think it's appropriate to break down Mike Mentzer specifically's philosophy behind how he trained, okay? What heavy-duty HIIT, high-intensity training, actually comprised of. Now, first and foremost is the obvious, high intensity. And what this actually means is not panting and breathing like crazy, which is what a lot of people think intensity is. Crazy pumps and all this bullshit. Instead, it's actually just training to failure. Now, he actually did this within a 6 to 10 rep range for the most part. So it wasn't work that was all just trying to chase a pump and look super swole within the workout. It was taking the muscle to concentric failure and even beyond that to eccentric failure. So high intensity, every set to extreme failure, to absolute failure. Let's put it that way. There's no such thing as RIR in Mike Mentzer's world or in his training. Next is low volume. We're talking about one set per muscle group in a single session. That's it. One exercise, one set per muscle group. So I think it's safe to qualify his approach as low volume, high intensity, which was the contrarian take at the time. Low frequency, as I just mentioned, lots of rest, not only between muscle groups, but between workouts themselves. Usually at least 48 hours to 72 hours between workouts, not between muscle groups, but between an actual workout. So if your workout split is in 3 days, let's say chest on day 1, shoulders on day 2, legs on day 3, whatever, right? Chest and back, shoulders and arms, and so on, you're taking 48 to 72 to even more than that hours between each and every workout, which is why it's low frequency, because you're hitting each muscle group at most one time a week, if not less. Now, he was a huge believer on forced reps, force negatives, supersets, drop sets. These are what we call intensifiers, and the purpose of it is to make sure that you're taking the intensity to the absolute extreme, because when you only have one set to do, you have to ensure that that set is of the absolute highest caliber, the absolute highest quality, the absolute highest stimulation. Next, don't chase soreness. It's going to impede your recovery time. So as he would always be quoted saying, you know, the inroad to recovery is greater the more sets you just keep adding on arbitrarily. You just want to hit 4 sets by 12 for every single exercise. All you're doing is creating a bigger inroad to recovery, which means your muscles have to take longer just to recover back to baseline before they can start to build more muscle tissue on top based on the stimulation. But most people didn't have enough time between workouts, hence why he did low frequency. They're hitting the same muscle group again in the next few days. They haven't even recovered from the first workout. So it's very redundant and they're spinning their wheels. And the last thing is he would emphasize progressive overload as the #1 factor to determine if you are making successful training adaptation. In other words, if you aren't increasing reps or load on the bar or a combination of both, it's safe to say that there's an issue in the training, you aren't recovering, or it might be an issue outside the training, nutrition, sleep, of course. But the point is this will be your indicator of if progress is being made or not, favorably to your goal, which in this case is muscle gain, but it could also just be strength gain, as the two are heavily correlated. Here is the way I like to put it based on my observation, based on what the literature says, which I'm going to go through, and then I'll give you the takeaways. But we have to understand that, obviously, as I'm going through this, you probably picked it up for yourself. Mentzer is on an extreme end of the spectrum. Extreme end of the spectrum. You can't be more extreme than this. Opposite to Arnold. Opposite to Arnold, Arnold is this extreme, okay? 6 days a week or even 7 days a week, twice a day for Arnold, 3-hour workouts plus. I mean, just read his encyclopedia of bodybuilding and you'll understand. Hitting each muscle group very frequently, tons and tons of volume, basically never-ending volume, okay? Even Tom Platz was quoted by saying he tried to do that and he didn't grow, he got smaller and fat, according to him, because he couldn't adapt to that amount of volume, okay? And when he rested more, he found he grew more. Why? No shit. Resting is where we actually grow, not in the gym, but we'll get to that shortly. The point is Mentzer is an extreme end of the spectrum, which is why there's a cult following around it, okay? Cult followings don't happen in moderate areas. They only happen on extreme ends, polarizing ends of the spectrum, okay? Because if you believe in this methodology, you attach and create an identity that is so far on that end of the spectrum that you are disconnected from anything else that could possibly be true. And you have to defend to the death your position, or else your ego will take a massive hit from that, right? And so what we see is a lot of people's entire identity now in the gym or in bodybuilding, and that's totally fine, of course, but is it necessarily conducive to figuring what's most effective? Or is it just conducive to fueling the ego and then be able to create content, let's say like this, where it's all about Mentzer and why all the other shit that everybody else does is completely wrong. If you're doing more than one set per muscle group, it's all wrong. So is it really just fueling that maybe? And down the line, it's going to be harder for them to realize that maybe they're going to have to change their way of training. This is not an effective, an optimal, an ideal way of thinking if you want to maximize your results and keep that flexibility open for the fact that even with modern science, we don't know the absolute truth, and likely there isn't because everything is so case by case. Case in point, specifically, guess what? Arnold Schwarzenegger trained, like I just mentioned, like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Very high volume. High volume doesn't work. Well, hold on a second. Arnold Schwarzenegger beat Mike Mentzer in the Mr. Olympia. Oh, controversial. Arnold Schwarzenegger is arguably one of the greatest bodybuilders of all time as far as actual results and actual hardware goes, right? Actual accomplishment. And he trained the way he did. He didn't train the way Mentzer did. What does that mean? Well, it means that there's always going to be a level of individuality that we have to account for. And the more you just get stuck on one end of an extreme, the worse it's going to be for you long term because you have to be closed-minded to realizing that it's maybe not so black and white after all. And I'm about to show you why that's the case so you can make more rational decisions around your training that will actually help you get the most out of it and enjoy it more because you won't be stuck on one or the other end of the spectrum. You'll be more open to the possibility and to trying new things that all of a sudden, now you've figured out something that actually works way better for you. With that said, I personally believe, and based on the data, and this is a big reason why the Mentzer methodology is coming up so popularly in this day and age, is because he did seem to be actually closer to the truth as far as productive and effectiveness and efficiency goes, as opposed to Arnold. Because let's be honest, how many of us want to spend 3 hours in the gym every single day? I love the gym, but 3 hours a day, we might have other things to do. And not only that, if you hit a plateau at 3 hours, now you got to spend 3.5 or 4. So when does it end? That's the problem. It could be beating up the joints. It could be, if you don't have the great genetics, it could just all be for somebody who trains like Mentzer to come up and beat you anyways. I believe, and based on what we're seeing, Mentzer was closer to the truth than the high volume bros. And by the way, you can replace Arnold with any and all of the pro bodybuilders and physique athletes that use his style of training, which is more people than the opposite. So let's actually go through what we need to understand about this approach. And I do have my iPad here just to make sure we cover some of the signs. Now, first and foremost, very clear by now in multiple scenarios that there is a graded dose-response relationship between how much volume you do and how much hypertrophy you obtain. Not only hypertrophy, but strength as well, which the two can be correlated depending on other factors like nutrition. So we've got a couple of meta-analyses showing that this is the case. Okay, the first one, it actually shows that more sets equated to more strength gain over time rather than less sets. And on the other meta-analysis by Schoenfeld, Ogburn, and Krieger showed that for hypertrophy, 5 sets or less versus 5 to 9 sets versus 10 or more sets. 10 or more sets consistently produces more hypertrophy, aka muscle gain, than the 5 to 9 set group or the 5 or less set group on a week-to-week basis. Now, of course, there's caveats, nuance, and limitations to all these studies. However, being that they're meta-analyses, they are going to account for at least more variation and nuanced than a, let's say, one-time study does. And based on other literature, it's been shown that taking close to failure, you can even get away with 6 to 9 total sets for a single muscle group 2 to 3 times per week, up to that amount. So that could total somewhere around 18, I believe the upper threshold was for advanced trainees, 18 sets to failure or close to failure is probably what you can get away with. Once you start going past that threshold, you won't recover as well anymore, okay? But the fact remains that one set, no matter how far you push through to failure, is still probably not as optimal or as effective in stimulating as much muscle growth as you want that, let's say, 2 sets would be, 3 sets would be, 4 sets. Now I'm going to put a graphic up on the screen to illustrate the fact that each set you do stimulates less and less muscle growth per set and more fatigue per set. But again, that doesn't mean that one set is the most optimal, because let's say that you only stimulate 60% of your gains from set 1. It's going to be the biggest stimulus for sure. But with the second set, you're going to stimulate 70%. The third set, 75%. Fourth set, 78%. Yeah, it's less and less every time, but if you want to get closer to 100%, you have to do more sets. So it's up to you. If you want maximum efficiency only, then yes, one set will stimulate plenty of growth. But if you want to maximize how much muscle you gain in the shortest period of time, more than one set's going to be ideal. Okay, taking close to failure, but we'll talk about that. Frequency, 1 time per week should be a minimum. I've got 2 studies showing this. One is also going to be Schoenfeld, Ogburn, and Krieger, a meta-analysis showing that 2 times per week was consistently better for hypertrophy than 1 time per week. Okay, so again, maximizing muscle growth may be better to hit a higher frequency. However, it does seem as well that if volume is equated, hitting a muscle group 1 time per week should be the bare minimum and is going to be enough to yield a large amount of your muscle gains, okay? Now, volume needs to be equated. Volume is the most important factor, and of course, that includes volume of sets taken to failure, not just random arbitrary sets and reps. Sets taken to failure, and you want to fit that within the week. Now, split it up with a minimum of 1 time per week, so a bro split is fine. You could do something like me, which is a 6-day split, so I'm hitting each muscle group twice within a 7-day period, or you can just hit it twice, you know, a push-pull legs and upper lower, however else you want to do it, or a full body and hit it more frequently. So frequency-wise, Mike Mentzer was a little bit too far on the low end to maximize muscle gain. As far as intensity, let's talk about that. That's the most important component, is it not? Well, currently there's a preprint of a series of meta-regressions done by Zach Robinson et al., and it is showing that essentially there's a nonlinear dose-response relationship between how close you go to failure and how much muscle gain you achieve. What does that mean? It means that literally each rep and reserve less, closer to failure, the closer proximity to failure you train, the more and more hypertrophic result or stimulus you will achieve. People take that information and say, oh, see, Mike Mentzer was right. They take it as dogma. They take it as, oh my God, I'm never training away from failure because it's a waste of time. That is not true, because it also shows by that very series of meta-regressions that still has to be peer-reviewed, but nonetheless shows that 1 RIR stimulates a large amount of muscle growth still. 2 RIR, same thing. 3, it's progressively less the opposite way. So theoretically, 5 RIR is still stimulating muscle growth. So if you're Arnold and you're doing 1,000 sets and they're all at 5 RIR, then you're still going to stimulate massive amounts of muscle growth. Just keep in mind, volume and intensity have an inverse relationship. The higher intensity on a per set basis, the less volume you can get away with. It's just as simple as that. If we learned anything, it's the harder you push each set, the less sets you can get away with. Why? Because of fatigue, right? Central fatigue going to accumulate. That's going to get in the way of subsequent training sessions. So with that said, just keep that relationship in mind, and that means that if there's a case where in some sets you program that you're not going to failure or going to RIR, then guess what? You can do maybe 3 sets in that particular exercise for that session, and you progressively get closer to failure on each one. Whereas if you went to all-out failure, probably only 2 sets might be good enough for you. It really depends there. That's where the individual preference or nuance or recovery rate comes into play. How are your other variables? All that stuff is to be taken into account. However, what we can take from this, and I'm going to give you the recap at the end, is the following. Somewhere around failure is a good idea for most of the time if your goal is to maximize muscle gain. In other words, if you are training frequently away from failure, you're probably not being as efficient and as productive as possible. So my personal recommendation, which we'll summarize, but for now I'll say this. somewhere around 2 RIR or less on a per set basis means you can get away with a moderate to low amount of volume, but still more than Mentzer, and maximize muscle growth and stimulus on a per set basis, and minimize general fatigue as a result of both those factors, okay? So I hope that makes sense so far. So that's what we know there, training to failure. Okay, that's probably the best current evidence we have that accumulates everything. Next is intensifiers. Now, what this seems to be is, for example, Brentano et al., we have one that shows that more effort and more muscle damage, which impedes recovery, comes from doing agonist supersets. So supersetting the same muscle group together, back to back, is a less efficient way of adding more volume. Unfortunately, that is what Mentzer did in a lot of his workouts. He would superset leg extension, boom, straight to a leg press. He would superset pec fly, boom, straight to an incline press. Okay, with no rest or very limited rest in between, this is just not the best way to go about it. Though you can stimulate probably as effectively if you're super fresh with a superset like this or a drop set up front, it still is going to be at most as stimulative as a straight set. And again, it's only one set, technically. Yeah, you might squeeze out a few more effective reps from it, but another straight set after a long enough period of time rest would just be more effective in the end. And on that note, I do want to bring up a study that does show that 1 minute rest versus 5 minute rest, for example, 1 minute rest is going to actually produce less myofibrillar protein synthesis post-workout. In other words, less potential to grow muscle if you're doing sets with only 1 minute rest between versus 5 minute rest. Again, it doesn't mean take every set with 5 minute rest. It means that a longer rest period is usually better than a shorter one. Of course, there's a cap or a limit to this. The recommendation seems to make sense to be around 3 to 5 minutes if you absolutely want to maximize each set that you are doing, get the most stimulus from it, elevate muscle protein synthesis at the end of the workout the most, okay? And again, that allows with all the recommendations I've given to you thus far. So the intensifiers, probably not the most ideal, with the exception of one study that shows that antagonist supersets, so let's say doing a chest press followed by a rowing type movement, antagonist muscle groups, actually that is just as effective, just as stimulative, and it saves you time. So if Mentzer maybe made that little switch, he actually could have even improved results further that way. But now you know it, and you could do that. Muscle damage increases recovery time. Mentzer hit the nail on the head with this, okay? It's pretty clear now via, let's say, this one study that more muscle damage will hinder more growth. This one from Damas et al. Muscle protein synthesis is elevated more due to muscle damage, but it doesn't mean that it's actually going towards adding myofibrils or contractile tissue, but rather it goes towards repairing the damaged myofibrils first. Only once damage is attenuated, then the resources can go towards building muscle. So Mentzer hit it precisely. You're overdoing your sets. You're absolutely annihilating your muscle. Well, guess what? You're only increasing the time that your body needs to just recover to baseline before we can put resources, your nutrition and your sleep, towards adding contractile tissue, i.e. muscle. And lastly, progressive overload. I'm not throwing a study up for this as there could be too many, but I hope we all understand that yes, progressive overload is probably the best indicator of hypertrophy, of overall progress in the gym. So if you aren't tracking your workouts, that's where you want to start as far as making sure you're seeing progress on a week-to-week basis. Now, with that said, let's finish with a takeaway. Okay, hopefully you understand things better of how Mentzer trained and probably a more effective way to train. Let's talk about what that actually looks like, broken down very simply. Here's how I would put it, okay? Now, there is a little bit of my observation experience and just anecdote layered on top of this for a good starting point for who watches my types of videos. 3 to 10 sets per muscle group, close to or all the way to failure, minimum 2 RIR or less, is probably better on a week-to-week basis to start. You should fall somewhere in this range on a week-to-week basis to start. And then from there, you're going to see how are you recovering, how are you performing, are you progressively overloading at a good rate? If so, you might be good within that range. You might want to add another set next week and see how you feel again. And just keep that up until you reach the volume that makes sense for you in combination with the intensity that makes sense for you. If you want to take every set to failure, that's totally fine. Rest 3 to 5 minutes between, but you'll probably want to aim for a lower end of this, 3 to 5 sets per muscle group per week to start, and then take it up from there. It's always better to err on the side of caution or conservative estimates up front so that you don't have to start tapering things back in the middle of a mesocycle. All right, next is hit each muscle group 1 time per week as a minimum. So a bro split is fine or a more frequent split is fine as well. It's up to you. Just make sure that you're hitting your total equated volume within that split up frequency. All right. Now, drop sets are fine. Antagonist supersets are actually really good if you want to do antagonists like a chest and back day, a quads and hams days with antagonist supersetting. That's fine. A buys and tries, those are great. In fact, that could be your split right there. However, drop sets are okay as well, but try to do them more at the beginning of the workout. Rest, pause sets. These types of intensifiers are fine. Are they better, more effective than a straight set? Another straight set? Probably not. So just keep that in mind. If you can, get your volume in through straight sets. At least at the beginning of the meso, you can add intensifiers as things go on just to eke in a little bit more volume. And next is forced and negatives are probably not worth it because they've been shown to increase muscle damage tremendously, increase central fatigue, and it's just not worth the amount of stimulation you're getting based on another straight set. So I wouldn't actually focus on those, and risk of injury is extremely high on these ones. Lastly is track workouts for progressive overload, as I mentioned. Now, here's one thing I'm going to mention for you. Two things, actually. One is you can pick up my free physique tracker for free to see how I track all my stats, my progressive overload, etc. on a day-to-day basis. Keep track of everything, make sure you're seeing progress. And secondly is something that could help you out big time. If any of what I mentioned here, especially this approach, a sort of a lower volume based on modern science, but high intensity, high enough to stimulate tons of muscle growth approach appeals to you, but you don't want to go through all the hassle of building it all out yourself, building out the mesos, knowing if you're hitting the right reps, sets, frequency, the right intensity, the right form, etc., then I have something pretty cool to offer. Now, a lot of people have taken this up already since I made a video on this on TikTok, but there are spots available still to join what I'm offering as the Mentzer 2.0. What this is it's on a training app. I've built out all of the programming, and I continue to do so every week and every month in accordance with these principles, which are essentially a modern twist backed by modern science applied to Mentzer's original style of training to maximize a low volume, high intensity approach. And I will message you and be on the app directly to coach you through things, watch your form, rate your intensity, and just see session comments and all of that good stuff. Then this is the way to go for you. Join the Mentzer 2.0 program. There's currently a deal for the first 100 people that join. Again, spots are still available at the time of me recording this. 33% off for life if you decide to try it. Now, you can just try it for a 7-day trial, but when you sign up for the 7-day trial, make sure you input the code just in case you decide to stay on. If you don't like it, you can cancel. That's totally fine. But if you decide to stay on, make sure you use this code at checkout, M2Launch. The link is going to be in the description down below. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if this helps. Hopefully, you have a better understanding as to the actual reality behind Mike Mentzer's methodologies, how to optimize based on modern science so you can find a more effective way to do low volume, high intensity workouts so you can maximize your gain in less time. Now, if you have any questions or comments about this, make sure to comment them down below, or any video topics you want to see going forward. I'm going to be dropping videos at least twice a week, so I'm happy to cover any topics that you want. Aside from that, subscribe if you want to build your ultimate physique naturally. And with that said, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.